I'm Daniel, a 42-year-old architect with a penchant for restoring old buildings. My wife, Clara, 39, is a botanical illustrator, her delicate hands coaxing life onto paper with ink and watercolor. We've been married for 14 years, our home a restored Victorian in Portland, filled with her plants and my blueprints. Our life seemed a tapestry of quiet joys, morning coffee on the porch, her laughter at my terrible puns, our shared love for obscure jazz records. But lately, I'd noticed a shift, subtle as a draft through a cracked window. Clara's eyes, once warm as amber, darted away when I spoke. Her phone, always face down now, buzzed at odd hours. I chalked it up to her new project, a series of illustrations for a prestigious gallery show. She'd been spending long hours at her studio, returning with smudges of ink on her fingers and a distracted smile. Last Tuesday, I came home early from a site visit. Clara wasn't there, though she'd said she'd be working from home. Her studio, a converted attic, was empty, her easel untouched. A note on the fridge read, "Out with Elise, back late." Elise, her best friend, was in Vancouver for a conference. I'd seen her Instagram post that morning. My stomach twisted, not with anger but with a hollow curiosity. I poured a whiskey and sat in the dark, the record player spinning Coltrane's Blue Train. I didn't confront her when she slipped in at 2 a.m., her hair mussed, smelling faintly of cedar and something unfamiliar. Instead, I watched her sleep, wondering what secrets bloomed in the spaces she no longer shared with me. The next day, I checked her phone while she showered. A text from gallery contact read, "Missed you last night. More soon." My pulse thudded in my ears. I didn't recognize the number, but the intimacy of those words clawed at me. Clara emerged, humming, oblivious to my discovery. I kissed her forehead, my lips tight, and left for work. That evening I followed her. She drove not to her studio but to a sleek loft downtown, where a man, tall, wiry, with a sculptor's hands, greeted her at the door. They didn't embrace, but their familiarity was a knife. I stood across the street, rain soaking my coat, and realized Clara's betrayal wasn't just physical. It was a theft of her essence, given to someone else. His name was Julian, I learned later, a 35-year-old sculptor whose abstract pieces adorned galleries from Seattle to San Francisco. Clara had met him at an art symposium 6 months ago. I found his website, his portfolio filled with twisting metal forms that seemed to mock my structured world. I didn't confront Clara. Instead, I became a ghost in my own life, observing her with a detached precision. She'd leave for meetings wearing dresses I hadn't seen in years, her laughter brighter, her steps lighter. At home, she was tender but distant, like a performer playing a role. I wondered if she noticed my silence, my eyes tracing her movements as if decoding a blueprint. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Marla with a smoker's rasp and no patience for sentiment. She tailed Clara and Julian, delivering reports that read like fiction. They didn't meet in hotels or shadowy corners but in public, art galleries, cafes, a botanical garden where Clara sketched while Julian watched. Marla's photos showed them laughing, their hands brushing over sketchbooks, their connection intellectual, emotional, alive in a way ours hadn't been in years. This wasn't a fling. It was a partnership, a merging of minds that cut deeper than any physical act. I sat in my office, staring at a photo of Clara leaning into Julian's shoulder, her face radiant. I didn't feel rage, not yet, just a cold resolve to understand. I began to study Julian. His Instagram was a gallery of his work, interspersed with cryptic quotes about creation and connection. One post, dated a month ago, showed a sculpture titled Ephemeral Bloom, a cascade of steel petals that mirrored Clara's illustrations. The caption read, "Inspired by a muse who sees the world in lines and light." My jaw clenched. I cross-referenced his posts with Clara's schedule, mapping their encounters. They'd spent a weekend in Astoria, ostensibly for a gallery opening, but Marla's report confirmed they'd shared a cabin, their evenings spent discussing art and dreams. I imagined Clara's voice, soft and earnest, weaving stories for him that she no longer told me. That night, I cooked Clara's favorite meal, roasted duck with figs. She complimented the dish, her smile practiced. I asked about her gallery show, probing gently. She spoke of deadlines, her eyes flickering to her phone. I nodded, pouring her wine, my mind already plotting. Revenge wasn't enough. I wanted to dismantle the world they'd built, to make them feel the weight of their betrayal as keenly as I did. I didn't sleep much anymore. My nights were spent in the study, surrounded by blueprints and Marla's reports, crafting a plan as meticulous as any architectural design. Clara's betrayal wasn't just about Julian. It was about her choosing a life that excluded me, a life where she bloomed in ways I couldn't reach. I wanted her to feel that loss, not through confrontation but through a slow, deliberate unraveling. Julian, too, would face consequences, not for loving her, but for presuming he could claim what was mine without cost. I started small. Julian's next exhibition was in 2 weeks, a high-profile event at a downtown gallery. I contacted the curator anonymously, posing as a concerned collector. I planted doubts about Julian's authenticity, citing rumors of plagiarized designs. I fabricated just enough detail, referencing obscure artists whose work vaguely resembled his, to make the curator pause. Marla, ever resourceful, dug into Julian's past, uncovering a minor scandal from his early career, a disputed commission where he'd allegedly copied another sculptor's concept. I leaked this to an art blog, ensuring it surfaced just before the exhibition. The whispers began, subtle but corrosive, tarnishing Julian's reputation. With Clara, I was subtler. I began mirroring her distance, canceling dinners to work late, leaving notes that echoed her vagueness. I watched her confusion grow, her attempts to bridge the gap faltering. One evening, I left a sketchbook open on her desk. Not hers, but one I'd bought, filled with crude imitations of her style, signed with Julian's initials. She found it, her face paling, but she said nothing. The seed of doubt was planted. Did Julian truly value her art? Or was he using her? I wanted her to question their bond, to feel the insecurity she'd inflicted on me. I also befriended Elise, Clara's friend, under the guise of planning a surprise for Clara's birthday. Over coffee, I steered the conversation to Julian, dropping hints about his reputation with collaborators. Elise, loyal but gossipy, promised to warn Clara. I knew Clara would dismiss it, but the idea would linger, a splinter in her mind. Meanwhile, I audited our finances, discovering Clara had funneled money into a joint account for gallery expenses. I didn't touch it, but I noted every transaction, building a case for later. By the exhibition's opening, Julian's name was shadowed by murmurs. Clara attended, radiant in a dress I'd once bought her, oblivious to the storm I'd seeded. I stayed home, sipping whiskey, imagining her pride curdling as whispers reached her ears. My revenge was a structure taking shape, each piece calculated to collapse their world without them ever seeing my hand. The night of Julian's exhibition, I didn't attend, but Marla was there, blending into the crowd with her camera. Her report arrived at midnight, a clinical dissection of the evening. The gallery was packed, the elite of Portland's art scene sipping champagne under Julian's towering sculptures. Clara stood by his side, her smile tight, as critics murmured about the plagiarism rumors. A prominent reviewer, tipped off by my anonymous email, questioned Julian publicly about ephemeral blue mess origins. He stammered, citing shared inspiration, but the damage was done. Clara, Marla noted, looked stricken, her hand clutching Julian's arm as if to anchor him. I read the report in my study, the house silent, and felt a grim satisfaction. This was only the beginning. The next morning, Clara was quiet, her eyes red. She mentioned the exhibition, calling it challenging for Julian. I nodded, feigning concern, and asked if she was okay. She hesitated, then said she needed to focus on her own work. I saw the fracture. Her faith in Julian was shaken, not by me but by the world I'd manipulated. I intensified my efforts. Using a burner phone, I texted Julian, posing as a disgruntled former collaborator. "You stole my ideas once, and now you're using her too," I wrote, attaching a doctored image of one of Clara's sketches. altered to resemble an older artist's work. He didn't respond, but I knew the message landed. I turned to Clara's career next. Her gallery show was in a month, her illustrations the centerpiece. I contacted the gallery sponsor, a wealthy patron I'd met at a fundraiser, and suggested, as a concerned friend, that Clara's recent work might be derivative. I sent examples, her sketches juxtaposed with obscure botanical art I'd found online, carefully curated to imply influence. The patron promised to look into it. Meanwhile, I left articles about artistic integrity on Clara's desk, circled in red. She began to withdraw, her confidence eroding. At dinner, she barely spoke, her fork pushing food around her plate. I wasn't cruel in person. I was attentive, cooking her meals, asking about her day, but my warmth was a facade, a contrast to the chaos I was orchestrating. I wanted her to feel the ground shifting beneath her, to question her choices without knowing why. Julian's next move, a commission for a public sculpture, was jeopardized. I ensured the selection committee received an anonymous dossier detailing his history of ethical lapses. The commission went to another artist. Clara, I knew, would feel the ripple, her muse diminished. Clara's gallery show was 3 weeks away, and she was unraveling. Her studio, once a sanctuary, was now a place of frenetic energy. She'd stay there until dawn, redrawing sketches, muttering about originality. I'd find her asleep at her desk, ink staining her fingers, her laptop open to forums debating artistic theft. I didn't gloat. I played the supportive husband, bringing her coffee, suggesting she take a break. But inside, I was a cartographer, mapping her descent. Julian's career was faltering too. The plagiarism rumors had spread, amplified by art blogs I'd seeded. A major collector pulled out of a deal, and Julian's social media went silent. Marla reported he'd been drinking heavily, his loft a mess of half-finished sculptures. I escalated my plan. I hired a forger, a contact from Marla's network, to create a series of lost sketches predating Clara's work, mimicking her style but signed by a fictional artist. I leaked these to a niche art journal, framing them as a rediscovered archive. The journal ran a story, and the art community buzzed. Clara's show was now under scrutiny, her integrity questioned. She came home one night, tears streaking her face, and told me about the article. "They think I copied someone," she whispered. I held her, murmuring reassurances, but my mind was elsewhere, calculating the next move. Julian, desperate to salvage his reputation, reached out to Clara for support. Marla intercepted their texts, his pleas for her to stand by him, her responses hesitant. I saw my opening. I sent Clara an anonymous email, posing as a gallery insider, warning that Julian was using her name to deflect his own scandals. "He's dragging you down," it read. She didn't mention it, but I saw her pull away, her text to him growing curt. Their bond, once vibrant, was fraying under the weight of doubt I'd sown. At home, I maintained the illusion of normalcy. I planned a weekend getaway, knowing Clara would decline. She was too consumed by her show. Her refusal stung, a reminder of her betrayal, but it fueled me. I began laying the groundwork for the final act of my revenge, one that would strip them both of their passions. I contacted a lawyer, discreetly, to explore options for our joint assets. I didn't want a divorce, not yet. I wanted Clara to feel the loss of everything she valued, just as I had. Julian would face a similar reckoning, his career reduced to ash. As I sat in my study, sketching the outlines of their ruin, I felt not triumph but a cold clarity. This was justice, measured and merciless. Clara's gallery show was 2 weeks away, and the air in our home felt brittle, like glass ready to shatter. She barely slept, her eyes shadowed, her hands trembling as she worked. The art world's whispers about her derivative illustrations had grown louder, fueled by the forged sketches I'd planted. She'd stopped talking about Julian, but I knew they still met. Marla's reports confirmed brief, tense encounters at a coffee shop, their faces strained. I didn't interrupt their unraveling. I orchestrated it. I sent Julian another anonymous message, this time from a concerned friend, hinting that Clara was distancing herself to protect her reputation. "She's calling you a liability," I wrote, attaching a fabricated email draft I'd crafted in her style. His reply, intercepted by Marla, was a single word: "Why?" I turned my attention to Clara's show. The gallery, under pressure from its patron, had reduced her exhibition space, citing concerns about authenticity. I'd ensured this by feeding the patron more comparisons between Clara's work and the forged archive. She came home one evening, her coat damp from rain, and collapsed on the couch. "They're cutting my show in half," she said, her voice hollow. I knelt beside her, stroking her hair, murmuring that she'd overcome this. But my mind was elsewhere, sketching the next phase. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to see her passion, her art, slip through her fingers. I began to isolate her socially. I reached out to her friends, posing as a worried husband, and shared vague concerns about her stress. Elise, already primed by our earlier talks, organized a group dinner without inviting Clara, claiming she needed space. Clara noticed, her texts to friends going unanswered. I watched her shrink, her confidence eroding. At night, she'd sit in her studio, staring at blank paper, unable to draw. I left a new article on her desk, one I'd paid a freelance critic to write, questioning the ethics of her recent work. She read it, her face crumpling, and didn't speak for hours. Julian's world was collapsing too. His latest sculpture, meant for a corporate plaza, was rejected after I leaked doctored emails suggesting he'd bribed a committee member. The art blogs pounced, and his name became synonymous with scandal. I imagined him alone in his loft, surrounded by twisted metal, his muse, Clara, slipping away. My revenge was a symphony, each note precise, building toward a crescendo that would leave them both hollow. Clara's show was 10 days away, and the gallery had downgraded her slot to a shared exhibit with a lesser-known painter. She didn't tell me directly. I overheard her on the phone, her voice breaking as she pleaded with the curator. I stood in the hallway, unseen, my pulse steady. Her betrayal had been a theft of her spirit, given to Julian in ways she'd withheld from me. Now I was reclaiming that spirit piece by piece, by dismantling the world they'd built together. Julian's career was in tatters. His upcoming solo show canceled after I'd sent an anonymous tip to the venue about financial irregularities. Marla confirmed he'd stopped sculpting, his loft a graveyard of abandoned projects. I deepened the rift between them. Using a cloned email account, I sent Clara a message from Julian, its tone desperate, accusing her of abandoning him. "You used me for inspiration, then tossed me aside." It read. I mirrored this with a message to Julian, crafted as Clara, expressing disgust at his manipulative behavior. Their texts, once frequent, stopped entirely. Marla's photos showed Clara alone at her studio, Julian drinking at a dive bar. I wanted them to feel the betrayal they'd inflicted on me, not through confrontation but through the slow poison of doubt. At home, I played the devoted husband with chilling precision. I cooked elaborate meals, left notes praising Clara's talent, even framed one of her older sketches for our living room. She'd smile, but it was a ghost of her old warmth, her eyes searching mine for something she couldn't name. I began to shift our finances, quietly transferring funds from our joint account to a private one, citing tax planning when she asked. She didn't press. Her mind was consumed by the gallery's demands and the growing scrutiny of her work. I contacted a journalist, posing as a whistleblower, and fed them a story about Clara's questionable artistic process, complete with doctored correspondence suggesting she'd paid for positive reviews. The piece ran in a local arts magazine, small but influential. Clara found it on her own, her hands shaking as she read. "This isn't true," she whispered, looking at me for reassurance. I hugged her, my voice soft, but inside, I was a sculptor, chiseling away at her foundation. Julian, meanwhile, received an eviction notice for his loft, arranged through a contact who owed Marla a favor. Their worlds were shrinking, and I was the architect of their confinement. Clara's show opened on a rainy Friday, a diminished affair in a corner of the gallery. I attended, my arm around her, playing the proud husband. Her illustrations, once vibrant, looked strained, their lines hesitant. The crowd was sparse, the critics absent. A few attendees whispered about the plagiarism rumors, their eyes darting to Clara. She stood by her work, her smile forced, clutching a glass of wine. I complimented her publicly, my voice warm, but I'd ensured this moment would wound her. I'd paid a heckler, a disheveled artist type, to question her integrity during the Q&A. "How do you respond to claims you copied your style?" he asked, his voice loud. Clara faltered, her response incoherent. The room grew silent, and I squeezed her hand, my face a mask of concern. Julian didn't attend. Marla reported he'd moved to a cheap apartment, his sculptures sold off to cover debts. I'd engineered this through a series of anonymous tips to his creditors, amplifying his financial ruin. I sent him a final message, posed as Clara, declaring she never wanted to see him again. "You ruined me," it read. I knew he'd believe it, his trust in her shattered by the lies I'd woven. Clara, meanwhile, returned from the show defeated, her spirit dimmed. She didn't draw anymore, her studio gathered dust. I suggested a vacation, knowing she'd refuse. She was too fragile to leave her crumbling world. I began to target her legacy. I contacted her publisher, who'd planned a book of her illustrations, and sent evidence of her unoriginal work, including the forged sketches. The publisher delayed the project indefinitely. Clara received the email while I was at work, and when I came home, she was curled on the couch, staring at nothing. "Everything I've built is falling apart," she said. I held her, my words soothing, but my mind was on the next step, stripping her of the community that had once celebrated her. I spread rumors through Elise, suggesting Clara had badmouthed her friends. Invitations stopped and Clara's isolation grew. I wasn't done with Julian. I arranged for a fake commission, a lucrative project that required him to relocate to a remote town. When he arrived, the client vanished, leaving him stranded with no funds. Marla's last report showed him working odd jobs, his hands, once those of a sculptor, calloused from manual labor. I felt no pity. Their betrayal had been a theft of my life's meaning. My revenge was a reclamation, cold and absolute. Our home, once alive with Clara's laughter and my drafting tools, was now a mausoleum. Clara moved through it like a specter, her eyes dull, her hands idle. She'd stopped answering calls, her friends alienated by the rumors I'd spread. Her gallery show had been a public humiliation, and the art world had turned its back. I maintained my facade, cooking breakfast, leaving notes, but my warmth was a calculated contrast to her despair. I wanted her to feel the void she'd created by choosing Julian, to live in the husk of her passion. At night, I'd sit in my study, reviewing Marla's updates, plotting the final strokes of my revenge. Julian was a broken man, Marla reported. He'd taken a job as a warehouse worker, his dreams of sculpting abandoned. I'd ensured this by leaking his location to a persistent creditor, who hounded him relentlessly. I sent him one last anonymous letter, a typed note that read, "You thought you could take her world and leave no trace. You were wrong." I didn't need a response. I knew it would haunt him. Clara, unaware of his fate, stopped mentioning him, but I saw his shadow in her silence, her guilt a weight I'd amplified. I turned to our shared life. I met with my lawyer, finalizing the transfer of our assets to accounts Clara couldn't access. I didn't plan to leave her, not yet. Divorce was too simple. I wanted her to live with the consequences, to wake each day in a home that mirrored her betrayal. I began to redecorate, replacing her plants with sterile furniture, erasing traces of her presence. She noticed but said nothing, her spirit too eroded to protest. I donated her old sketchbooks to a thrift store, claiming it was a decluttering effort. Her eyes flickered with pain, but she didn't fight. I spread one final rumor, this time to Clara's family. Posing as a concerned colleague, I hinted that she'd been dishonest in her career, causing them to question her. Her mother called, her tone sharp, and Clara hung up in tears. I was there, of course, offering comfort, my arms a cage. My revenge wasn't about destruction but transformation, turning Clara's world into a mirror of my pain, forcing her to confront the cost of her choices. Clara's birthday was a week away, and I planned it as the culmination of my revenge. I organized a party, inviting her estranged friends and family, knowing they'd decline. The empty RSVPs would be a silent indictment, a reminder of her isolation. I booked a venue, a gallery space she'd once loved, and filled it with replicas of her illustrations, altered to highlight their copied elements. A subtle jab only she'd understand. I told her it was a surprise to celebrate her resilience. She nodded, her eyes vacant, too broken to suspect my intent. Julian, I learned, had left the state, chasing another false lead I'd planted. A teaching job that didn't exist. I ensured his name remained tainted, sending a final dossier to every major gallery on the West Coast, cementing his exile from the art world. His betrayal had been in taking Clara's light. I'd extinguished his own. With Clara, I was nearly done. I drafted a letter to be delivered after the party, confessing my knowledge of her affair with Julian. Not in anger, but in cold detail, outlining how I'd dismantled their lives. I wouldn't send it yet. I wanted her to feel the weight of her ruin first. The party would be a stage, a final act where Clara faced the wreckage of her world. I'd stand by her, the devoted husband, while she saw the empty chairs, the mocking art, the absence of her muse. My revenge was complete. Not in chaos, but in silence, a structure of loss as precise as any blueprint I'd ever drawn. I felt no joy, only the calm of a man who'd balanced the scales. Clara's birthday arrived, a gray Saturday that mirrored the pallor of our home. I'd told her the party was a surprise, a chance to reclaim her spark. She dressed in a green dress I'd chosen, her movements mechanical, her eyes distant. The venue, a small gallery she'd once dreamed of exhibiting in, was set with tables, candles, and a catered spread, ostentatious for the emptiness I'd ensured. I'd sent invitations to her friends, family, and former colleagues, knowing they'd decline, their trust eroded by the rumors I'd spread. The RSVPs sat in a folder on my desk, a litany of polite refusals I'd show her later, like evidence in a trial. We arrived at 7 p.m., Clara's hand cold in mine. The gallery was silent, save for the hum of air conditioning. On the walls hung reproductions of her illustrations, subtly altered to echo the forged sketches I'd leaked. To an outsider, they were art. To Clara, they were accusations. She froze, her breath catching as she recognized the tweaks. Lines borrowed, compositions mirrored. "What is this?" she whispered. I squeezed her shoulder, my voice warm. "A tribute to your work," I said, guiding her to a table set for two. No guests arrived. The caterers, paid to leave early, vanished by 7:30. Clara sat, staring at the empty chairs, her face a mask of confusion and shame. I poured her wine, my movements deliberate. "I thought they'd come," I said, feigning disappointment. She didn't respond, her fingers tracing the tablecloth. I'd arranged a slideshow, projected on the gallery wall. Photos of her past triumphs, interspersed with articles I'd planted about her unoriginality. The final slide was a photo of her and Julian, laughing at the botanical garden, captured by Marla. Clara's glass slipped, shattering on the floor. "How did you?" she began, but her voice broke. I didn't answer, letting the image speak. She understood, not the full scope of my revenge, but enough to feel its sting. I drove her home in silence. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stared out the window. My revenge was nearly complete, a structure of loss as precise as any building I'd designed. But I needed one final act to ensure she'd never forget the cost of her betrayal. The next morning, Clara stayed in bed, her face turned to the wall. I left the house, claiming a work emergency, but drove to a quiet cafe to finalize my last move. The letter I drafted, a confession of my knowledge and actions, sat in my laptop, its words cold and unflinching. "Clara," it began, "I know about Julian, about the life you built with him, the pieces of yourself you gave away. I've watched you bloom in his world, and I've taken it apart, piece by piece. It detailed my campaign, the rumors, the forgeries, the financial maneuvers, the isolation. I didn't gloat. I stated facts, letting the weight of my betrayal mirror hers. I printed the letter and placed it in an envelope, leaving it on her studio desk alongside a USB drive. The drive contained Marla's reports, photos, and intercepted messages, proof of her affair and my response. I wanted her to see the architecture of my revenge, to know it was no accident. But I didn't deliver it yet. Timing was everything. I needed her to feel the void first, to live in the wreckage of her career and relationships. That evening, I cooked dinner, her favorite pasta, and spoke of mundane things. Weather, a new project. She barely ate, her eyes searching mine, sensing the storm but unable to name it. Julian, Marla reported, was in Idaho, working as a farmhand, his art a distant memory. I'd sent him a package days earlier anonymously. A small sculpture, a crude replica of ephemeral bloom with a note reading, "You took her light. Now you have none." Marla confirmed he'd burned it, his face haggard. I felt no satisfaction, only the calm of a task completed. Clara's punishment was different. I began to pack her studio, claiming we needed the space. Her sketchbooks, brushes, and inks went into boxes, each movement a deliberate erasure. She watched, silent, her hands trembling. I invited Elise over, ostensibly to check on Clara. Elise, primed by my earlier manipulations, spoke bluntly about Clara's dishonesty. Unaware I'd fed her the narrative. Clara listened, her face crumpling, and excused herself. I saw the moment her spirit broke, the realization that her world had turned against her. 3 days after the party, I gave Clara the letter. I placed it on her pillow while she showered, the USB drive tucked inside. I left for work, knowing she'd find it. When I returned, she was in the living room, the letter in her lap, her face ashen. The USB's contents were open on her laptop, photos, texts, my meticulous notes. She looked at me, not with anger but with a hollow recognition. "Why?" she whispered. I sat across from her, my voice steady. "You chose him," I said. "You gave him what was ours, your mind, your heart, your art." I took it back. She didn't argue, didn't cry. The weight of my revenge had crushed her defenses. I explained, not cruelly, how I dismantled her career, alienated her friends, and ruined Julian. "You built a world without me," I said. "Now you live in mine." She stared at the floor, the USB drive in her hand, its evidence a mirror of her betrayal. I didn't raise my voice. My calm was more devastating. She asked if I wanted a divorce. I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "I want you to feel this." I'd already moved most of our savings, leaving her just enough to survive. The house, still in my name, was a cage I'd designed. I began hosting dinners, inviting my colleagues, who knew nothing of her fall. Clara played the hostess, her smiles brittle, her shame a silent guest. I donated her remaining art supplies to a community center, claiming it was for charity. She didn't protest, her will eroded. Julian, I learned, had vanished, his phone disconnected. I'd broken him, not with violence but with precision, stripping him of his identity as an artist. Clara tried to draw again, but her lines were shaky, her passion gone. I framed one of her failed sketches, hanging it in the hall, a trophy of my victory. She passed it daily, her eyes averted. My revenge wasn't about destruction but transformation, forcing her to live in the shadow of her betrayal, just as I had. Months passed, and our life settled into a grim routine. Clara worked a part-time job at a bookstore, her artistic dreams abandoned. She moved through the house like a tenant, polite but detached. I was courteous, cooking meals, asking about her day, but my warmth was a facade, a reminder of what she'd lost. The art world had forgotten her. Her name, once celebrated, was a footnote in cautionary tales about authenticity. I monitored her subtly, checking her phone, her emails, ensuring she didn't rebuild. She didn't try. The letter and USB had shattered her. the truth of my revenge a weight she couldn't shed. I kept tabs on Julian through Marla's contacts. He'd settled in a small town, working construction, his hands no longer those of a sculptor. I sent him one final message, a postcard with a photo of Clara's failed sketch, and signed. I knew it would reach him, a silent reminder of his role in her ruin. My revenge had been a dual structure, collapsing both their worlds. At home, I redecorated, replacing Clara's touches with stark minimalism. The house was mine, a monument to my control. Clara's family reached out once, but I intercepted the call, claiming she wasn't ready to talk. They stopped trying. Her isolation was complete, her betrayal a wound she relived daily. I began a new project, restoring a historic library, and threw myself into it, my passion a contrast to her emptiness. Colleagues praised my focus, unaware of the darkness driving it. Clara attended one of my work events, her presence a formality, her smile a ghost. I saw the pain in her eyes and felt nothing. No guilt, no triumph, just the certainty of justice. I considered divorce but decided against it. Leaving her would be mercy. Staying was punishment. She'd live with me, in the life I'd shaped, her betrayal a silent companion. I framed another of her sketches, this one from her studio's final days, and hung it beside the first. She flinched when she saw it, but said nothing. The house was a gallery of her failure, and I was its curator. A year after the party, Clara was a shadow of herself. She worked, ate, slept, but her spirit was gone, her betrayal a scar I'd carved into her life. The bookstore job paid little. She relied on the allowance I gave her, a deliberate reminder of her dependence. I'd sold her car, citing budget cuts, and she took the bus, her head bowed. The art world had moved on, her name erased. Julian, Marla confirmed, was a laborer in Montana, his dreams buried. I didn't contact him again. His ruin was complete. I thrived. My library project won awards, my name celebrated in circles Clara once aspired to. At home, I maintained the facade, dinners, conversations, but every act was calculated to remind her of her loss. I kept the letter and USB in a safe, a silent threat. She never mentioned them, but I saw their weight in her eyes. Our marriage was a contract, not of love but of consequence. She'd chosen Julian, built a world with him, and I dismantled it, brick by brick, leaving her in the rubble. One evening, Clara tried to draw, her first attempt in months. I watched from the doorway unseen. Her lines were clumsy, her hand shaking. She tore the paper, her shoulders slumping. I didn't comfort her. Instead, I hung the torn sketch in the hall, another relic of her fall. She passed it daily, her gaze averted. My revenge was a living thing, a structure that endured, forcing her to confront her betrayal every day. I didn't forgive, didn't forget. My life moved forward, my passion intact, while Clara and Julian lived in the ruins I designed. The scales were balanced, my justice absolute. The house, the sketches, the silence. They were my blueprint, a testament to a betrayal avenged, a wound repaid with merciless precision.